Hey everybody, welcome in. It is the Utopia Football Podcast. This is going to be a crazy one because it's happening. We're recording late Tuesday morning, day 2 of free agency. Literally, the Texans just traded for running back Joe Mixon within the last 15 minutes or so before I went live. So there's a lot of stuff to get to from yesterday. I think by most Texan fans' account, a fairly inactive day on free agency, or at least inactive at the level that Texan fans wanted to see things happen. And then today has already been started off with some major stuff with Joe Mixon, soon to become a Houston Texan via trade. So let's get to all of it. I'm Sean Pendergast, one half of Payne and Pendergast, Sports Radio 610. Appreciate all of you downloading, subscribing to the podcast. If you're new to the podcast, click the subscribe button. I promise you won't be disappointed. We've got the draft coming up in April. This is a great time of year to be listening to the podcast, following it, subscribe, rate, review. It all helps us here, and we appreciate you downloading. I'm going to give you a quick synopsis of free agency, where the Texans are, talk about this Joe Mixon trade, and also the work that is still left to do, because in my mind, they still have some work left to do here over the next day, 2 days, week, however long this process takes with free agency. We got a mailbag as well. We'll do a mailbag a little bit later on in the show, HOU mailbag at gmail.com. The email right there at the bottom if you're watching on the stream, right there. HOU mailbag at gmail.com to send in your questions. Getting more and more emails every week. Can't get to all of them, but please feel free to send them in, especially with the off season coming up. Once we're beyond the draft and the schedule release, we're kind of into not uncharted territory, but we're into territory where old emails come in handy that time of year. Let's just put it that way. So feel free to send them HOU mailbag at gmail.com. So let's get it going. Let's start with the big news. Literally just came down about 10:30 Houston time that Joe Mixon is going to become a Houston Texan. And I will say this, I'm a little surprised at the Texans making this move, not because Joe Mixon doesn't have something to offer as a player. I'm a little bit surprised just because of his past. We know in 2014, and I know that was 10 years ago, so it's a long time ago, but he was involved in a situation where he punched a woman. It was on video. It's pretty nasty video. Certainly served his time. He was suspended at OU. He has kept his nose clean, both at OU and then once he was drafted into the NFL. He was a 4th-round pick. I think a lot of the reason he was a 4th-round pick was because of the priors that he had at OU. But he's been a stalwart for the Cincinnati Bengals since 2017 when he was drafted. So he's had 7 good seasons in Cincinnati. He's been involved in some weird stuff of late, too, where he was accused of pointing a gun at a woman. That there were no charges there. So just a couple incidents in 2023 that kind of make you pause a little bit. I'm mildly surprised only because I feel like if there was a team in the NFL or in sports where there might not be a statute of limitations on hitting a woman, I thought the Houston Texans would fall into that category. I'm not excoriating the Texans for making the trade for Joe Mixon. I'm just merely bringing it up as something that I'm guessing factored into the trade. I'm guessing there was for sure discussions about this. When you have a head coach like D'Amico Ryans who says we take the person over the player, then you have to have conversations about that, at least address it. Clearly the Texans seem to be, assuming the trade does get consummated, that they're okay with what they've learned about Joe Mixon. If they're okay, I'm okay. So the Texans, it looks like we'll have Joe Mixon on their team. And that's a good thing. Let's shift over to the football part of it now. The market for running backs was dwindling. And I know that you can always cherry pick running backs. Devin Singletary was signed 2 weeks into free agency last year. He got signed on the first day of free agency yesterday to a 3-year deal. There's always running backs floating around out there. And obviously you have the draft coming up as well. Not a great class of running backs coming up in this draft. But I was somebody who wanted a frontline starting running back, someone who's proven over multiple seasons that they can carry the load if need be, that Devin Singletary had to carry last year when it became apparent that Dameon Pierce was just not functioning in this offense. Pierce is still in the building. My guess is unless he gets traded, he's going to factor in some way to the Texans backfield, at least in training camp. I still think they're going to draft a running back as well on probably day 3, maybe day 2. But the list of running backs, if you're someone like me who wanted a frontline running back, by the time we were going to bed last night, it was Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon. And Aaron Jones and Joe Mixon weren't even available at the beginning of the day. Aaron Jones got released because the Packers signed Josh Jacobs to a 4-year, $48 million deal. So Aaron Jones and Joe Mixon were kind of late entries to the party. We see this happen sometimes where teams put it out there that they're going to release a guy. It generates activity of GMs calling them up and saying, hey, rather than just release him, how about we trade you, duke you a little something for him, trade him something. I'm expecting the draft compensation for Joe Mixon to be very, very minimal. We saw the Texans involved in a situation like this last year with Shaq Mason. The Bucs were getting ready to cut Shaq Mason for salary cap purposes. Nick Caserio had a past with Shaq Mason, liked him as a player. So they end up doing a trade where it's Shaq Mason and a 7th for a 6th-round pick. I would expect that it's going to be something similar to that for Joe Mixon, that Cincinnati's just looking to get something for him as opposed to just cutting him loose. The Texans inherit a player who has a cap hit. I've seen anywhere from $6 million to $8 million, somewhere in that range. Depends on how you look at the incentives in his deal. I think the bottom line is that this allows the Texans to get a marquee running back, get a starting caliber running back that's run in this system with Zach Taylor. You know, he runs the Kubiak-Shanahan system, has had success in this system, but they're only committed to him for a year. So you're not getting into the game of having to give 4-year deals to Josh Jacobs or 3-year deals to Saquon Barkley or whatever Derrick Henry ends up getting. I'm guessing Derrick Henry is going to wind up getting more than just 1 year. Maybe. Who knows? The Texans not being in the market anymore, maybe that makes it easier for a team to sign Derrick Henry. So Joe Mixon, 1 year, and I think at a modest salary, I think it's a good move. And we'll see where it goes from there. But mildly surprised it happened. Good with the move from a football standpoint. And I don't think that the Texans might not be done at running back in free agency. So we can talk about that. But Joe Mixon is a Houston Texan, and looking forward to hearing what Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans have to say about that, because I'm sure they'll be asked about Joe Mixon's kind of somewhat checkered past when it's time to address what the Texans did and did not do in free agency. Speaking of free agency, the frenzy over the last couple of days, I think the frenzy's been more around the league than around the Houston Texans. To me, the biggest moves that were made were the Brian Burns trade. Brian Burns going from Carolina to the Giants. I think that's a little bit of a surprise for a 2nd and a 5th-round pick. He gets his deal, 5 years, $150 million. So that's a huge deal for a premier pass rusher. The Giants are a pretty sporty defensive line now, with Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns bookending a defensive line that has Dexter Lawrence on the interior. So pretty solid defensive, more than solid, damn near elite defensive line for the New York Giants, who were pretty aggressive yesterday. Obviously, that was the most aggressive move of the day. That and the Atlanta Falcons signing Kirk Cousins to a 4-year, $180 million deal with $100 million guaranteed. So Cousins goes to Atlanta. I just think it's fascinating to me, the level of desperation that exists still for quarterbacks. Think about that for a second, that Kirk Cousins, who has played the game, I'm talking the business game, better than almost any quarterback in the history of the league, gets another $100 million guaranteed. He's 36 years old. He's coming off of an Achilles tear, and he's never really won anything substantial. He's won 1 playoff game in his career. He's known as somebody who fairly routinely plays poorly under the bright lights of primetime football. And yet, not only is it a move that Atlanta felt like they had to make, they're largely being lauded for this move. Now, where does this put them? I think it puts Atlanta good enough to probably win the NFC South, which means they're good enough to get a home playoff game. I think the ride probably stops there, though. I don't know that Kirk Cousins all of a sudden is going to find I don't know that Matty Ice left the ice water to inject into Kirk Cousins' veins in Atlanta when he left there a couple of years ago. So Atlanta's a better football team now than they were at the beginning of free agency with Cousins. I just don't think they're even anywhere close to being a Super Bowl contender. As far as the Brian Burns deal goes, he's obviously going to be toiling on one of the lesser teams in the NFL this year. From a Texans perspective, I think of two things. One, should that have been a market the Texans were in on? Edge rusher is something they need. They let Jonathan Grenard walk in free agency to Minnesota for $19 million. They did sign Danico Autry. We'll talk about that in just a second. But would a 2 and a 5 for the right to give Brian Burns $30 million a year over 5 years, would that be something you would have wanted to do as a Texan fan? I think that fits into the category of what it would have been if the Texans had signed Christian Wilkins to what he got from the Raiders. He got over $28 million a year from the Raiders, in which I would have been very excited to have Christian Wilkins, or in the case of the hypothetical trade, Brian Burns, on the football team. But when the sugar high of that wore off, I would have been nervous about the cap ramifications of it. And with Burns, obviously, the draft compensation ramifications of it as well, because you're giving up draft capital for the right to pay somebody. So I would have been cool with Brian Burns being on the team. I'm fine with them not getting involved in that market of trading draft capital. And if it's a second round pick, that to me is important draft capital for the right to pay or maybe even overpay a guy. So I'm fine with them not being involved with that, with the Brian Burns stuff. My second thought on Brian Burns is, and I'm going to be thinking about this on any big time contract that gets signed at quarterback, defensive end, cornerback, probably left tackle, because Laramie Tunsil is probably looking to get one more bag before it's all said and done. But certainly quarterback, defensive end, and cornerback. And wide receiver too, probably. We'll throw Nico Collins in there. I'm going to be keeping an eye on all these deals, because with every passing month, with every passing year, we get closer and closer to paying the guys that I think Nick Caserio is really keeping some of this dry powder for down the road. Not right now, but down the road. CJ Stroud, quarterback. We know he's going to be the highest paid player in football at some point if he keeps playing the way he did as a rookie and improves upon that, certainly. Will Anderson's the one I was thinking of, obviously, with Brian Burns. If you're Will Anderson, not that Will Anderson needs incentive for anything. He's a pretty self-motivated dude. But I got to imagine there's part of Will Anderson that saw the tweet come out, or if he was watching TV and saw the news break, the push notification, however he gets his news, about a 5-year, $150 million deal for an edge rusher. I know if I was Will Anderson, that would get me pretty fired up. And we're talking still at least another 2 to 3 years before he gets his deal. So what will it be by the time he's ready to get that second contract? $35 million, probably something like that. Now the key is he's got to play at a level where he deserves that. But defensive rookie of the year, and was ascending at the end of the year. Most of his sack production came in the second half of the season. I think Will Anderson's going to put himself in that category of player this year, where we're going to be talking about having to plan for something like that down the road. Great problem to have, planning for CJ Stroud, Will Anderson. I'll throw Derek Stingley Jr. in there. Health is the big thing for him, but when he was on the field this year, he was spectacular. These are all great problems to have. Young players that you've been taking with high picks coming to fruition, so that all these teams that we're watching trying to manage cap space, that's hopefully the Texans at some point here in the near future. That's the two big deals yesterday, Brian Burns and Kirk Cousins. Those are my thoughts on that. As far as the Texans go in free agency, it seemed to me like the overwhelming emotion on Monday throughout the day and at the end of the day was, best case, I would say, underwhelmed. I think there was an edge of the spectrum of Texan fans that were angry with how Monday went, because they wanted to be one of those teams that was spending early in free agency, spending big on free agency. I guess I understand the underwhelmed part, because that's kind of where I fall. I think Texan fans fell into three buckets. I think by Monday night, I think the first bucket was that free agency is not won on day one. It's okay. I think number two is I'm underwhelmed because I was hoping to see some things, but I get it. I can listen to that free agency is not a day one thing. And then there's the people that wanted the Texans to be one of the teams that were making all the fireworks and splashy signings on day one. And those people were angry and depressed at the end of the day yesterday. I think the Joe Mixon trade has helped pull some of them back off of the lunatic fringe a little bit. but I was probably in that middle category. For the biggest reason was I was so psyched to get home yesterday and sit in a chair, laptop out, TV on, multiple TVs on, as you guys can see in the background right there. That's my setup back there. Had AirPods on, listening to Sports Radio 610 while this is all going down, and there's nothing happening. Not only is there nothing happening, Lonnie Johnson was the only one that got signed by the Texans. Lonnie Johnson got re-signed by the Texans yesterday. And for about 3 hours, while Grenard and Saquon Barkley and all these other big names, Kirk Cousins, are all going off the board, the Texans had only done one thing: re-sign Lonnie Johnson, of all things. That was painful to have to get the tweets from everybody that was so angry about all that. I think at the end of the day, so yeah, I was in the underwhelmed category. I was, yesterday was kind of it's a popcorn fart for me, knowing that the sun will come out on Tuesday. I think the sense I got from the people who fell into bucket number 3, the angry bucket, was that once A, Saquon Barkley signed with the Eagles, B, the reports came out that the Texans were involved in the Saquon Barkley signing or in the negotiations. Word was that the Texans got up to 3 years, $33 million. He went for 3 years, almost $38 million. The feeling that, hey, 4 or 5 more million, we could have had Saquon Barkley. From that standpoint, I'm totally cool with Joe Mixon on a 1-year deal than 3 years for Saquon Barkley. But the sense I got was that once that Saquon Barkley signing didn't go down for the Texans, it colored the rest of the day. People couldn't get excited about Danico Autry. People couldn't get excited about Azeez Al-Shaair, who were two, I thought, very sensible, good, solid signings that the Texans made, that Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans made later in the day, in the afternoon and early evening. That Saquon Barkley non-signing just kind of set the mood for the day for a lot of people. Tried to talk as many as I could off the ledge. It's a multi-day thing. As far as the actual free agency for the Texans go, I love the Autry signing. 2 years, $20 million. Very productive pass rusher, older player. We've seen plenty of him because he's spent his career in Indianapolis and in Tennessee. They seem to be distraught about losing him in Tennessee. Jeffrey Simmons, the star tackle for the Tennessee Titans, defensive tackle, did not like that at all, that they were losing Danico Autry. So as a Texan fan, I love seeing that. They stole our football team, so we're going to steal Danico Autry and Azeez Al-Shaair. I don't know if that's a proportional response, but as far as free agency goes this year, I'm cool with it. As far as Al-Shaair goes, has experience with D'Amico Ryans for those many years with San Francisco. So they've worked together before. And I think it's an upgrade in speed. I think you can make an argument. Grenard was a more productive player than Danico Autry last year. John Grenard was, at least in terms of sacks. Autry actually pressured the passer better than Jonathan Grenard. But I think for what they signed for and considering Grenard's injury history, I think you could argue that the Texans at worst evened out on one side of the defensive line. So you got Autry on one side and Will Anderson on the other. And then I think with linebacker, I think they may have upgraded over Blake Cashman. And I love what Cashman did last year. But I think Azeez Al-Shaair has the potential to be a more explosive defensive player. There's more upside to Al-Shaair. So I like both of those signings. The Texans made a few other lower-level signings. I mentioned Lonnie Johnson. That had a lot of people worked up just because we know how things ended with Lonnie here in Houston back in 2021 or 22, whenever that was. He's been on a couple teams since then. I'll credit Lonnie Johnson. At least he's tweeting the right things. He seems to have matured over the course of staring his football mortality in the face. So I'm willing to entertain the idea that Lonnie Johnson could be a contributor on the team. Probably not a starter or anything like that, but a special teams contributor and a depth piece in the secondary. Noah Brown's coming back on I haven't seen the terms yet, but I'm guessing he's coming back on a wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5 type of deal. If they do what I hope they do in free agency, in signing wide receivers and in the draft, Noah Brown should be fighting for a roster spot at best. So they brought him back. The Texans let Devin Singletary walk. He got a 3-year deal from the Giants. Good for him. Kind of dawned on me on Monday morning that when Devin Singletary had not yet signed, that maybe we underestimated what his market might be. And indeed we did. The Giants were willing to give him a 3-year deal at nearly $6 million a year. So there was that. And then Cam Johnston leaves for the Steelers, the punter. Texans bring in Tommy Townsend, who just 2 years ago was an all-pro punter for the Kansas City Chiefs. We're swapping capable punters. I'm cool with all that. The Mixon trade helps the trajectory of this free agency part of the calendar year. The Texans, I think you can make an argument, woke up this morning with a team that was a worse team than the one that ended the season in Baltimore. Certainly can make that argument. Joe Mixon is a big step towards getting back to where you were coming out of that game. I think they're still at least a few more signings away from feeling like they've improved the roster in free agency. I would love to see a wide receiver, like a wide receiver 3 type. Calvin Ridley's really the only one left on the market that's considered in like close to the wide receiver 1 category, and even that's Calvin Ridley. But Curtis Samuel, Tyler Boyd would be 2 big names I would be looking at if I were the Texans. I think guys that fit good in this offense. Curtis Samuel, a great run after catch guy, and Tyler Boyd played in this offense in Cincinnati. He was teammates with Joe Mixon there. So maybe we get another Cincinnati Bengal, but I would look for another wide receiver. I was hoping for a splash signing with with Christian Wilkins. And obviously that didn't happen. He went to the Raiders. Danielle Hunter, to my knowledge, is still out there. In fact, maybe I should just check the old phone here. I haven't seen any push notifications about any big signings since I started recording. So I think Danielle Hunter, I was looking for a splash. Danielle Hunter would qualify as that. That would be a whole lot of fun. I think you can bump Danico Autry inside at times if you want to. You got a lot of versatility on that offensive line. And Danielle Hunter's from here. He's from Katy. So I'd like to see that. They checked off running back with Mixon, so I'm cool there. Other than that, maybe just some other pieces. Jadeveon Clowney, if they don't get Danielle Hunter, would be one I would be intrigued by on a 1-year deal. Chase Young on a 1-year deal would intrigue me. I think those are the types of signings that Nick Caserio holds out from day 1 to go get in day 2 and 3. So again, if you're listening to this podcast and you're someone who was distraught after day 1, I would say just give this free agency season time. The Texans still have the resources to go do some things. They just don't want to overpay for them. That's all. So there you go. All right. So there's kind of your overview of free agency with the Texans and what I'm hoping we see over the next couple of days. But not real aggressive on day 1. I just think that's their MO. I think they feel really good about this football team and the direction they're going. I don't think they're saving dry powder for 2025 because they feel like they're a year away. I think they want to maximize this window with CJ Stroud, and they're doing things that they feel are the right things to do for the team. Trading for Joe Mixon is certainly an aggressive move by the Houston Texans. All right, let's get into the mailbag. And again, the mailing or the email address at the bottom there, houmailbag@gmail.com. That's the address to send me your emails. Let's get right into the mailbag. Got a few questions here. Dave in Round Rock says, I'm waiting to see who, and keep in mind, some of these emails came in before free agency, so I'll kind of tweak them so that my answers are current here. Dave in Round Rock, I'm waiting to see who Nick picks up, and so far not making a splash signing anywhere. Okay, well, that's probably still applicable. Is it possible that he's being frugal because of the cap hit the Texans will take in the next few years with Nico, CJ, Will Anderson, Stingley, and when the others hit free agency? Nick Caserio has always said he looks at the cap and things in a 2-year window. And the only one out of all those that you said that really falls into the 2-year window this year and next year's offseason is Nico Collins. I know that Derek Stingley Jr. will be eligible for an extension after this coming season. It's very, very rare in the NFL that anybody other than quarterbacks gets an extension after year 3. He'd be eligible, and maybe the Texans want to do it. That's what they're looking at possibly with Nico Collins right now. So that, again, that would be a rarity if Nico after year 3 gets an extension. But he's the only one out of that group that I feel it would impact the calculus of this year. CJ Stroud is 2 more years off from even entertaining an extension. And even once he gets that extension, the money wouldn't kick in for another year. So I don't think they're necessarily planning like with hard numbers and a sharpened pencil down for those guys, but we know what's coming. These are all the guys they want to retain and be part of the foundation, particularly CJ Stroud and Will Anderson. Good question, Dave. Let's get to Aaron in Cali. Says, asked me, do you have a draft crush or anyone perhaps under the radar that you're really hoping the Texans grab in the upcoming draft? Says mine is Malachi Corley, who's the yak king of college football. He's a Western Kentucky converted running back who plays wide receiver, really good in short yardage. He says, I can't help but think of a Deebo Samuel type with him to go with Nico and Tank. Malachi Corley is a good one. There's a lot of wide receivers that ran really, really well at the combine. My draft crush isn't anybody who's necessarily under the radar. I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I would love to see it if Brock Bowers, the tight end from Georgia, were to fall in the draft into a range where Nick Caserio could move up to go get him. And now, man, now think of the weapons you're talking about. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz, Brock Bowers, Joe Mixon in the backfield. Holy smokes. To go with C.J. Stroud, an elite level quarterback. So that's my draft crush. It's as far as under the radar guys. The running back position is a day 2 and day 3 thing. I'm probably going to need to examine that a little bit more before I fall in love with any of those guys. I know there's the New Hampshire running back that did the DX crotch chop when they were getting to run drills at the combine. So maybe that dude, John Harris, really likes that guy. Hang on, I got to get his name. I keep forgetting his name. New Hampshire running back. Let's look it up here. Oh yeah, Dylan Lobb. Is it Lobb or Lobby? I don't even know. But that's somebody. He's on my dating app. All right, Aaron. I may swipe on him. I got to see. But right now, my dream is the Brock Bowers trade up dream for the Texans. Aaron also asked for my all-time Texans dream team. I'm going to save that. I feel like that's a whole episode that I could do in June when there's nothing going on. So I'm going to save that one. Dan, native Houstonian, that's what he has in his email, says this. Why isn't okay. Dan, I apologize. I accidentally cut off your question a little too early. I'll save it for next week. The question says, why isn't he ever mentioned as a potential free agent pickup? He can catch the ball out of the backfield and is a good runner. He does great in my fantasy football league. Problem is, I cut off the questions. I cut off his question where I don't know who he is. So that pronoun hurts the cause. Sorry about that, Dan. But good to have you as a native Houstonian. Matt says this. We had plenty of games last year that we could have iced, but we couldn't get a first down in the last 2 or 3 minutes, and we had to punt and then rely on our defense to hold. Man, ain't that the truth? I want a running back who can close games out, get us tough first downs, but I can't find any stats to research who that might be. And Matt's asking, is there somewhere you can search to see who the best closers are in football? I don't know. I'm guessing Derrick Henry's fairly up the board. And if this were an hour ago, I might be mentioning Derrick Henry as a possibility. The question now is, can Joe Mixon be that type of back? And I think he can be. So yeah, I think some of this isn't even about the back. It's on the offensive line to open up holes. So let's slow down a little bit on it just being running back. The offensive line is absolutely going to need to improve. Even with an improved situation at running back, Joe Mixon is a better player than Devin Singletary, and certainly a better player in this offense than Dameon Pierce is right now. But I think the offensive line probably has more soul searching to do when it comes to closing out games than the running backs do. Chris in the ATL says, I don't know if this is a podcast-friendly question. Who would be your preferred value menu item free agency signings? And he does one of those things where you can spend $6, okay, on 3 players. One $3 player, one $2 player, one $1 player. I want you to just picture a tic-tac-toe board with a $3 row, a $2 row, and a $1 row, and 3 players in each of those rows. A running back, an edge rusher, and a defensive tackle. His $3 guys are Saquon Barkley, Danielle Hunter, Chris Jones. His $2 guys, Derrick Henry, Chase Young, and then Grover Stewart. And then his $1 guys, Austin Eckler, J.D. Clowney, Fletcher Cox. This is an easy one for me. My $3 player would be Danielle Hunter. My $2 player would be Derrick Henry. And my $1 player would be Jadeveon Clowney, just to throw more juice to the edges there with the Texans. But maybe Chris Jones in that $3 category might make a little more sense. Jones Henry, Clowney. I feel like with those three guys, not only would I have really good additions to my football team, I feel like I could walk into any bar anywhere in the country and just tell those three guys to go wreck shop, and we would own the place within about 5 minutes. All right, a couple more mailbag questions, and then we'll get out of here. Neil in Liverpool. I'm hoping the Texans are looking for a backup quarterback in the draft, probably day 3. I don't feel good about our backup QB situation. If CJ gets banged up, would like to see them bring in a young backup to get them indoctrinated into the system. Mentions Brock Purdy. What do you think? And if you agree, do you have any suitable QBs in mind? I really don't care about the QBs in this class. I'm cool with them drafting a quarterback if they want to with one of their day 3 picks, just to point out what Neil says, just kind of keep the pipeline going. Davis Mills will be gone after this year. I'm guessing he'll go sign somewhere. Case Keenum, he might be coaching this time next year. Who knows? He's on the last year of his deal. If they want to sign a quarterback, CJ Stroud is going to be the quarterback moving forward for this team. As far as late round quarterbacks go, the only one I've followed super close is Sam Hartman because he went to Notre Dame, ran pretty well at the combine. For a guy who's probably going to go in the 6th round, maybe he got a lot of attention at the combine. So that's a name maybe to keep an eye on if the Texans like him. But if they end up not drafting a quarterback, I'm fine with that. It's backup quarterback. Case went in and won a game for you last year, and then they pooped the bed against Cleveland. That's what happens when backup quarterbacks go in. Joe Q, my guy Joe Q, coming in with some questions here. I'll pick a couple off because he sent me like 5 of them. Who's the best quarterback in the NFC South? It seems like Cousins is significantly higher paid than Mayfield. I think your Bryce Young crush has receded, but open to being corrected. Okay. I did have a crush on Bryce Young last year. I will admit that. If I had to power rank the quarterbacks in the NFC South, you know what? I just trash talked Kirk Cousins a little while ago that he's coming off an ACL and he's 36 years old and he can't win. At least I know Baker Mayfield can win multiple playoff games as he has during his career. He won one last year against the Eagles. He won one when he was in Cleveland. Baker Mayfield's more my kind of guy too. Kirk Cousins seems like kind of a dork. And I think, Baker's healthy and he had a really good year and he still has good weapons there in Tampa. It'll be interesting how they adapt without Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator, who's now the head coach in Carolina. So let's do this. I'm going to go Mayfield 1. I think Mayfield is, I don't think he's a 1-year wonder. I'm going to Mayfield 1, Cousins 2, because he's got weapons there. He's got Kyle Pitts. He's got Drake London. He's got Bijan. They signed Darnell Mooney today. I'm going to go Bryce 3. I think Derek Carr is slipping. I think he's falling on the way out. And I think Canales is going to do good things with Bryce Young. I'm going to bump Bryce Young up to 3 in the NFC South. Derek Carr, you're the worst. Congratulations in the NFC South. Let me pick one more here from Joe Q. Is Nick just playing Moneyball, Nick Casario? Is he looking for best value at each position of need and willing to flex the draft to cover any gaps? Can we do anything but conclude that he thought price tags for Gernard, Cashman, Wilkley were too high? I that's all I conclude. I conclude nothing else because I think specifically with Gernard and Cashman, I think he would have liked to have had. I think they would have loved to have had both guys back. I think both guys would have loved to have been back. Price of poker got too high. They didn't want to pay $19 million for Gernard. They didn't want to pay 7 or 8 or whatever it was for Cashman. I think Wilkins and Barkley, the price just got too high for everybody. I mean, they are marquee free agents. So by definition, the person who's getting them is paying the highest price. So that's my only conclusion with that. I don't know that Nick plays Moneyball. Moneyball, there's an implication with Moneyball because it was the Oakland A's back in the early 2000s that you're this poverty team that's just trying to piece things together by doing things differently than everybody else and finding maybe some glitches in the matrix or some inefficiencies that you can take advantage of. I just don't think Nick Casario likes shopping on the first day of free agency. I don't think it's anything more than that. I think Nick has shown a willingness to pay at or above market, in my opinion, above market for certain guys. I mean, he made Titus Howard the 4th highest paid tackle, and Titus had only played tackle for like 2 of the 4 years he'd been in the NFL to that point. Nick made a low-level trade to bring Shaq Mason in and made him one of the highest paid guards in the sport. If I had to guess, I would guess if and when Nico Collins gets his extension, there's a decent chance we might be a little surprised as to how high the numbers are. So I think Nick has a willingness to maybe pay or even overpay for guys that he knows, guys that have been in the building. So I don't think he's playing money ball. I think he's just got an idea of where the values are. And I don't think he thinks value is in the first day of free agency. I think he thinks the first day of free agency might be where the least value is. And then later in free agency, with each day that goes by, there's more value in free agency. And then to him, the most valuable commodity, and I think this is where he and D'Amico Ryans are very aligned, the most valuable commodity is information you have about what kind of football person the guys are in the building. I think they put a tremendous value on knowing what they're getting in guys and having guys in the building there. And I think we've seen that with extensions that have been given out and probably will be given out here over the next year or two. All right. One more check of the phone to make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, we've got breaking news with Derrick Henry happening right here during the pod. Derrick Henry signing a 2-year, $16 million deal worth up to $20 million, including 9 fully guaranteed in the first year with the Baltimore Ravens. So no big surprise there. Derrick Henry's been tied to the Ravens since before free agency started. That's been the place he's been most likely to go. You can see now why the Texans made the trade for Joe Mixon. They could probably tell which way the wind was blowing with Derrick Henry, that it was going to take him to Baltimore. So good for Baltimore. Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson in the same backfield. I've been pining for Derrick Henry with the Houston Texans, saying that I think he's one of those backs that, like, once you reach 30 and you haven't had major injuries, that you probably can play till 34. Now I'm hoping I'm wrong on that. Now I'm hoping that Derrick Henry starts to break down like an old jalopy. But Derrick Henry, breaking news in the middle of the pod right there, going to the Baltimore Ravens. All right. Again, HOU mailbag at gmail.com if you want to send in questions for next week. We'll have a guest this Thursday. Probably going to take a look at how the Texans have settled into free agency here, and then look for guests that have covered some of the primary Texans free agents. So a Cincinnati person, maybe looking at a Nashville person for the 2 Titans that they signed as well. So that'll probably be the MO for Thursday's episode when it comes to guests. Maybe a recap of the big things the Texans have done in free agency. But again, Joe Mixon, the big news today, traded to the Houston Texans. And there's your running back. Derrick Henry goes to the Baltimore Ravens. So the running back, as far as starters out there, looks like it's dried up, and the Texans were able to at least get one. All right. Big thanks to Anthony Irwin, my producer, who does a great job getting the podcast out to all of you guys. Feel free to subscribe, rate, and review, as it says right there. If you haven't subscribed yet, if you're just getting the podcast, hit subscribe. It comes to you automatically wherever it is you listen to your podcast. We love when you rate and review, especially good reviews. That helps the podcast as well. So big thanks to all of you for listening. For Anthony, I am Sean. We are out of time. We will see you on Thursday. Be sure to keep following me on Twitter/X at Sean T. Pendergast. I'll be sharing my thoughts on free agency as it unfolds, and obviously keep it tuned to Sports Radio 610. 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Payne and Pendergast, but throughout the whole day, we're keeping you up to speed as a station on free agency and everything going on with the Texans. So until next time, have a great day, everybody.